Welcome to Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Jessie Ott, the host of this podcast, which is all about beverage innovation. I talk with innovation pioneers from agriculture to glass. Thank you for listening, and be sure to subscribe to be notified of all new episodes. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Thursday. I am Jessie Ott, and I have an exciting guest today, Bourcard Nesin, VP Research, Beverages at Rabobank. Welcome to Thursdays.
Thank you. I'm excited to be on the show, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. So where are you calling from?
I am calling from Portland, Maine, in my shared office. My wife working in the same room, who must listen to me constantly monologue about my work. But I'm in Portland, Maine. My office is in New York. I work for a Dutch bank called Rabobank that does a lot of work financing and supporting the drinks business. And my job as a researcher is to help our clients in the industry at large kind of navigate big, strategic challenges. And, most people think of, you do research, you're at a bank, you do equity analyst stuff, which would mean I tell people which stocks to buy. And I'm actually quite the opposite. I'm not allowed to talk about that stuff, which gives me a lot more freedom to think longer term, talk to more people, and be much more independent.
Yeah, that makes sense. And beverages are fun.
Beverages are fun. We have a podcast called Liquid Assets. We publish a report, and I've got to say, when I tell people what I do for a job, they usually think that's cool. So I don't like talking about my work because I think it's boring to say for the 100th time, but I do recognize that people think my job is cool.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I appreciate some data, and it's an exciting time to be a part of the beverage business because I would call it, like a turtle. It was pretty slow moving and it wasn't very creative. And the last 5 to 10 years have been, anything but. Like, there's just so much explosion happening and trends and, changes happening. And that's really exciting to be a part of.
I maybe am not on the same page as you on that front. I would do anything to have a boring year, like please, like give me no change. That's all I want. I want no change. So I'd appreciate no change.
Yeah. Unfortunately, with the changing, of the guard and different generations coming our way, we have to, adapt and see.
You mean global pandemic and then a reshuffling of the global economic order and all those things? Like, I would gladly just take a year in which we're like, nothing exciting happened this year. And I would gladly sacrifice, having 10 instead of 15 options of tequila RTDs to just have a boring year of my life in which I am not either A, scared for my life, or B, scared for my job.
Yeah. No, right. And then all the tariffs conversation, there's something every year.
Exciting doesn't mean fun. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, depending upon the topic, I guess you're right. So where are you from?
I grew up in northern Maine in a town of 400 people in the woods, a very rural conservative community. And then, went to undergrad in Maine, went to grad school in New York, and ended up in New York City working for a bank that funds wineries and breweries and distributors and other things like that. They do a lot more than that, but yeah.
That's really cool. And what else did you do?
Growing up?
Yeah, well, like, what did you, is that with Rabobank that you're talking about, or did you have other, work with other companies?
Rabobank's my first kind of like non-academic grown-up job. So I went to undergrad for kind of like ecology and farming and was really interested in the way that how do we valorize rural living in a way that was meaningful and improve our food system and save the world. And then I had to, at the end of that, I did some research and worked in a research lab, did research on plant genetics and evolution. And at the end of it, I ended up having to run a farm, which is both not remunerative and also very hard. And so you make no money and you work your butt off. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And so I went to grad school for economics and hoped, or my aspiration was to continue to work in academia, or at least in academic adjacent fields like impact evaluation. So I went to school for economics with the intention of working with NGOs and governments in determining whether or not government programs are working. So, hey, we're in some low middle income country. We have a lot of kids that aren't going to school and working. And so we're going to try and see if the government pays families $1,000 a year to keep their kids in school. Does that work? And I would ideally be the person who they called to say, hey, could you help us set up this program and figure out if this is a good use of government money or good use of NGO money? And I moved to New York because my wife's an architect and wanted to live there, and quickly discovered that the only jobs had 5,000 applicants or 2,000 applicants. And I don't have my uncle isn't the ambassador to Bulgaria. And so I wasn't ever going to get that opportunity. And so I ended up finding a home within a bank that finances food and agriculture companies. And it's been 8 years since then. It was an interesting journey. I would say I'd always pursued the topic that interested me most in the moment, and had the privilege to, not need a lot of financial backing to do that. Right. I ended up always finding some funding or some job that matched what I wanted to do. And things have turned out pretty well to this point. I'm kind of happy where I ended up.
Yeah, well, you have a lot of great posts, and you share a lot of great information in our industry, which is really great to follow. Running a farm, huh? Wow, that must have been, oh, man, it is such hard work. I grew up in a small rural town too, from Iowa. And so, I always tease and call myself a city girl. We didn't even have a stoplight in our town. We were like less than 1,000 people.
Neither did I.
Yeah.
No stoplight. We actually didn't have a store. There were literally no places you could get gasoline or.
Oh, wow. We definitely had that.
There was in the town over, but we were pretty small. So it's very funny because I feel like I was raised in the 70s, though I was born in 1990, because I didn't have internet growing up. I think there's a lot of the place where I grew up still doesn't have internet unless they do satellite or something like that.
Wow. That is pretty rural then. Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. No, I being a farmer. So did you have animals as well as
No, it
plants,
was kind of a greenhouse operation. So we were,
okay.
I actually was living in Miami and working for a large distributor of herbs and greens. This is not a euphemism, people. We sold what are called, I ran our kind of a microgreens operation. So essentially you sprout some seeds and then harvest them and ship them out to supermarkets for I guess they call it plant confetti, and every fancy restaurant you go to has those little greens. And my job was to figure out how to do that as efficiently as possible to get better at it. And it just wasn't my thing. It was a lot of managing people with a lot of Cuban immigrants working there. And I was middle management essentially. And, it was not that fun. It was cool, I think, when it started, but eventually, you're working your butt off. You have a good education, but you're making, I think I negotiated a $30,000 salary, and living in Miami on 30 grand is not that great, even as a middle management guy. So back to school.
That's not great. Yeah. Wow. But what a cool experience though.
For sure. Yeah.
Watching things grow is cool.
Yep. It is. Unfortunately, that is not what we're watching in the Bev Alc industry. That's certainly true. Not much growth there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. No, it's interesting growing in Florida versus other parts of the country because there's so much water here.
Yeah.
That
it's a lot of plant disease, a lot of plant disease pressure. And so it's very different, especially because growing up in Maine, you have 4 months to grow stuff.
Right. Exactly.
So it's all about season extension and how do you get plants in the ground or find hardier varieties that can go into the soil earlier, or double cropping. So if you're doing silage and things like that, can you get, some wheat crop, winter wheat, and, plant corn in May after you harvest it at boot stage with some high protein feed. Like that kind of stuff is,
Yeah.
That's what we think about. In Florida, it's just like grow, and it's a
Grow,
very
grow, grow.
different,
Yeah, and
very
weeds
different
do
environment.
too, really well.
Yeah.
That's what I have in my garden at the moment.
Weeds.
Weeds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when you don't live here full time, it's a bit hard to keep everything going.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so kind of back to my journey in the industry. I started out. It was a tough adjustment, I think. I have a very academic.
Yeah.
I guess I intellectualize things, right? And like to, I'm very comfortable with uncertainty and kind of not knowing stuff. And that was one of the biggest shocks for me culturally, going from a world of academia where I'm doing, publishing academic research in peer-reviewed journals, and going into the business world in which there is a lack of rigor, right? So people are content to put forward simple narratives that just seem to check out the box without necessarily really interrogating those questions. And so I've found, I don't think the industry would work well if everyone behaved like me, but being and bringing that perspective of rigor and curiosity to analysis in the BevAlc industry, which is my job, is really, really useful, because I don't think a lot of people bring that perspective. And I often find myself not being a contrarian because I am by nature contrarian, which I am, but because I genuinely believe that the industry is misunderstanding trends or misunderstanding the driver of trends. And so I really enjoy trying to get into the weeds and figure out, like, not just what's happening, but why and to whom, really, right?
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of speculation out there, but I think too, data's expensive. Getting access to data is difficult. If I'm sure Rabobank, you get access to whatever you need to do your job. No?
Exactly the opposite. It is
Oh no.
an interesting problem. So my data budget in my job, or I utilize the data we do have, which is not enough. I don't really use it, right, at all. And that's because one, don't have the same Circana or Nielsen data that beverage companies do, or distributors or retailers. And so why would I give them data they already have? And so I end up using, it limits what I can write about and how I can write about it. But it means the things I do write about need to be like pretty weird and original. And so it's kind of a crux at that like, it's a limitation that drives me to be slightly more innovative. Like what is
I
it?
would say so.
The something about, there's some analogy that, like, scarcity driving new stuff or whatever. I forget what it's
Innovation.
called. Yeah.
So what trends have you been writing about lately? What are you discovering?
I guess you invited me on after seeing my Gen Z report. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I thought that was super
Yeah.
interesting.
So, that was a fun report. And a lot of it had been building for years, but essentially, I guess the journey started like 2018, 2019. There were all these, like, literally, I looked at the Wall Street Journal and there were two articles that one said, and they were published within like 6 months of each other. One said, Americans are drinking less than ever, right? And the other one said, Americans are drinking more than ever. And I was like, which one is it?
Yeah, which one is it?
I went in and looked, and the answer was kind of, it depends who you're talking about. And so I kind of knew about all these trends that, like, well, older people drink more than they used to at the same age, but younger people, in particular, underage drinking is basically disappearing. But even then, if you go, okay, well, young people are drinking less, that's true. But which young people? It turns out boys. Boys are the ones that are drinking less, and women are drinking more or less the same as they did historically. And so you're seeing these, like, big declines happening one way or the other. And, when I look at the way the industry talks about younger generations, in particular Gen Z, there kind of are two very simplistic narratives that they used to explain why Gen Z is drinking less, because they are drinking less than previous generations. One is they are vain social media addicts that want to look as good as they can,
Take their picture
for their
of their
followers.
face.
And the other is they care deeply about health, that they want to be healthy. And neither of those seemed correct, because one, all people are vain. And I think that social media make people a little bit more concerned about the way they look. But honestly, everyone has always cared deeply about how they look. And it just might mean, which kind of media is communicating those expectations to you, right? Somebody on television, which everyone was watching, the monoculture, if you will, or the magazines and the cosmopolitans of the world to women and men's health for men, or is it social media putting that pressure on you? Those societal norms have always existed. And also, if you think about health and young people are made of rubber. They're just they're they don't have any health problems most of the time, right? You don't start having health issues until your 40s and 50s. You don't get your prostate checked until you're 50, right? These things that, like, as a boy you don't. But there are these issues that health problems emerge as you age. And so why are young people caring about health? And then also, like, my body is a temple for drugs and alcohol. That was my approach for being in my 20s, right? And so there was this big thing saying, like, why would you worry about the health effects of alcohol if you're young? Because one, like, death is a far off concept and health problems don't exist for you. But then also, you don't get hangovers yet, right? Like, you're not actually feeling the immediate impact of those things. And young people aren't really good at long-term planning. And so they need immediate feedback to change behavior. And so I was like, okay, I just wanted to write what I thought would be an actual good, analysis of why Gen Z is changing behavior. And I actually was really pleased because there's a lot of junk research out there that
There
this
is.
report got as much traction as it did. It ended up on World Star Hip Hop, if you don't know what that is, but it's like
No.
what if TMZ but lower brow. But it really hit a nerve with people. And so I was really glad to see that it did break through, because I think it was a rare example of real rigor being recognized in research on the, business side of the industry.
Yeah, yeah. People think that, we're not drinking as much and we're not doing this, we're not doing that, and everybody just kind of gets on the same bandwagon of what that is, right?
A lot of groupthink, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of people, like, in their defense, like, you got to go sell stuff. You got to go market stuff.
Yeah.
It's not your job to be an industry
Not our job,
analyst. And
yeah.
even when, I write about these things, like, even journalists can only pick out a couple of takeaways from these reports. And a lot of times they lack the nuance. And so, I wrote this report, and a big part of it was about, young people being poor. And so a lot of headlines are, Gen Z isn't saying no to alcohol, they're just broke. And I'm like, yes, they're broke, but so were millennials. Millennials were broke too when they were in their 20s, because every young person was broke. The anecdote I use is, like, I was in college and I tried to buy rice, and I tried to pay with a check and it got declined because I didn't have enough money in my bank account to buy rice. That was being young, like being broke. You don't have a job yet. But reality is that, yes, young people are poor, and yes, Gen Z is poor, compared to older people, right? 35-year-olds have better jobs than people in their 20s. That's, like, always been the case. But Gen Z is drinking less relative to their life stage, right? So they're young, they don't have money, they'll spend more later, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there is something unique about that generation that is driving them away from the alcohol category at this point in their life.
I think a lot of it, and this is just experience from, my nieces that live in different states, grew up in different states. But, with the vaping being so big and pot, a lot they don't really drink as much as they do pot. They just prefer pot. They don't
Yeah.
feel bad the next day, which, you don't they don't even know what a hangover means yet.
So I think that's a fair point, right? So, whether or not we get into what I actually wrote in the report or not, I'll leave to you as the person doing the interview. I think a lot of people, after I published this report, I didn't talk about marijuana at all. I guess that's the other one that people point to. It's like health, vanity, and marijuana. The one, I would argue that marijuana does give you a hangover, but like, it's just not the same as alcohol. If you smoke weed, you get groggy and don't feel great the next day. Like, you're a little bit slower and a little bit more
Really?
sleepy than you would be otherwise. But it's certainly less of a hangover, but I don't think it would be accurate to say it doesn't give you one. But the thing with weed is that the industry thinks about drugs and alcohol as being like share of throat is a thing I hear. And not only do I hate the phrase because it sounds icky, but it's also just not actually the way I think academics would approach the question, right? All drugs and are kind of like gateway drugs, right? So part of my one question that came up, right, was why would the opioid epidemic also be negatively affecting alcohol sales? Because people are doing different drugs, and they're like, why wouldn't it just be marijuana that would have that effect, right? And no one talks about that, because what do you even write about as an industry analyst when it comes to something as devastating and sad as the opioid epidemic? But
Yeah.
so point is that young people, if you're a young person and you've never done any drugs or anything, you're straight laced and you go out and you try smoking weed for the first time and you feel intoxicated for the first time, you're probably much more likely, and you have a good time, right? You have a good time. And you're probably much more likely to try alcohol now than you would have been otherwise, because you've come over a hurdle, right? You tried weed and you got messed up and it felt good. And you're like, well, now it's not as scary to try and get drunk. Why don't I go and do these other things? So for young people, there's actually been quite a bit of research, because this is of great interest to the academic community in reducing harm from drug use and alcohol use. They've actually looked at this question for a long time, and people have been smoking weed for a long time, way prior to legalization, right? Even if it wasn't legal, people were still using it.
Yeah.
So they're kind of cancel each other out. There's a lot of people who wouldn't smoke weed that start using marijuana, or more marijuana, like people who start using marijuana that then in turn use more alcohol after using it, and then people who do the opposite. But both effects are pretty equal in the literature at this point. And so I think there's an important distinction to make, that young people are using weed and marijuana use is going up and alcohol use is going down, but I don't necessarily think they're causal trends, right? I tend to think that weed is just I don't think people are sitting there being like, well, I can smoke weed or I can drink alcohol. I tend to think people are, alone more often. They're more isolated, they're more lonely, they're spending less time with people. And that means that alcohol, especially for young people, which is a very social drug for them, is something that is fewer opportunities to use. Whereas marijuana is a drug that really lends itself to being alone, right? If there's the most common complaint, I think, for people who don't like getting stoned is that it makes me anxious, and in particular, socially anxious. Guess what? Smoking by yourself, it's both kind of socially acceptable among those who smoke, but also it's just a drug that kind of fits that occasion better. And so I think the case I've been making to beverage alcohol companies is, your competition isn't marijuana, your competition is loneliness. And so you really have to be thinking along those lines to understand what the appropriate response is to these trends, because if you're out there battling marijuana, you're going to miss what's actually driving the declines in alcohol sales. Which is to say, I think marijuana use increases are more of a symptom of where culture is moving than it is a wholesale rejection of alcohol as not being, of thinking alcohol is bad.
Yeah. I know most people, or if you do smoke, most people will have the combination of both. It's party time, whatever. My system can't
Exactly.
handle it. It's like one or the other. And I don't really care for pot that much. Really. I prefer the taste of a really good cocktail.
Yeah.
Or a glass of wine or whatever.
I mean, I don't disagree. I think, a younger me was probably smoking more, but then I realized I don't like the anxiety that marijuana generated in me specifically. That's a, sample of one, but you need to understand that, the the share of the population that has tried marijuana in the United States is like 60% or something like that. But only 15% of the US population uses it regularly, i.e. once a month. Whereas alcohol is like 80% of people have tried it, but 65% of the people use it regularly. And so it's like, there's a lot of people who just don't like marijuana, that they don't like the way it feels. And that's what that statistic tells me, is that a lot of people are trying it and very few of them are saying, this is for me. And I think that's perfectly okay. I mean, marijuana, there's some possibility of dosing and limiting your dosing, but a lot of people have a terrible first experience. Similar is true for alcohol. I mean, who has fun their first time drinking? It usually ends up in disaster.
Yes.
But with marijuana, it can feel like you can disassociate in ways that you just don't really with alcohol. With alcohol, the worst outcome is actually quite bad, but most people's experience is, I feel really sick. Whereas marijuana is like, I feel like I'm going to die, or I'm very scared about what's happening around me. And it's also kind of a 0 to 100, right? You are either stoned or you're not, or you're, you don't really feel that much. I know that you can be really, really intentional about dosing with marijuana, but like with alcohol, you can drink a glass and not feel any effect, if it's a moderately sized glass. But I think, with marijuana, you're either kind of stoned or you're not. At
Yeah,
least that's
and
the way
with
it's historically been consumed.
gummies, it's a whole other level of craziness because it takes a little longer to kick in than so there's
Yep.
all those stories too.
There's a lot of it. Well, I mean, it's a real thing that I think there's a research anyways for me would suggest that combustible marijuana is safer than edible. One, I don't think the research is pretty clear that historically smoking marijuana hasn't been linked to, lung cancer or any of those things. There are serious concerns about marijuana and psychosis, and as having a family member who suffers from schizophrenia, seriously, I take that risk quite seriously, and it seems to be the most serious health effects associated with marijuana use. But yeah, it's definitely the edibles. The risk is that you take too much of it, right, and then you overdose, and you get, you can end up throwing up uncontrollably or have like a real breakdown and need to be hospitalized for, because you're terrified or, acting really erratically. Whereas with smoking, it doesn't last that long, and the effect is quicker onset. So you don't like sit there and go, I don't feel anything, I'll have another one. I don't feel anything, I'll have another one.
Right.
And that's what ends up happening with edibles.
Yeah. Yeah. That the first time I did edible, it was first of all too many milligrams, and it took me a long time to come down from it. It was not
It's horrible.
fun for me.
It's
Yeah,
not
it
fun.
was just
It's not fun.
it's not fun.
Overdoing marijuana is terrible. It's terrible. It's the worst. And I think that is, something the marijuana industry needs to be really conscious of, is that, when you have your first entry point into the category, you need to be trying really hard to make sure people don't have a terrible experience, which, previous to today, where you see a lot of THC drinks in retail environments that are really low dose, the initial surge of beverages after legalization, because centralized manufacturing was not an option because you had to keep everything inside one state. And so there wasn't really much incentive to build the capital for consistency. You would see beverages were like one non-resealable bottle of marijuana beverage that had 10 doses. And you're just like, so obviously somebody's going to drink that whole bottle and they're going to get
Right.
100 milligrams when they really should be taking 5, and they are
Yeah.
not going to be having a good time. But
No.
I guess, again, coming back to this thing with young people, I just, in some ways, I'm jealous of the younger generation because they are more inclusive and really try and not, compared to at least where I grew up, attack people on the base of immutable characteristics, right? And they're much more accepting in some ways, but also they're showing us through statistics on mental well-being and the probability of having a major depressive episode is doubled. Like, they're not having a good time, even if beverage alcohol, like underage drinking and things like that, are declining. They're more isolated, they're more lonely, they're having more trouble connecting with people. And again, I think marijuana use to some extent is a symptom of that, not really a driver of it.
That's really interesting. Is there other findings that you want to talk about within that article?
Yeah. So, I think a big part of the research was showing that, underage drinking is declining because of the loss of the social occasions, but also, kind of trying to say that younger people aren't, like, underage drinking is really where we're seeing the steepest declines. And understanding what is driving those declines is important to understanding whether or not they will persist into later adulthood. And the trends have so far suggested that underage drinking and people in their early 20s are drinking less, in part because they start drinking later in life, that people aren't drinking in high school anymore. And by the age of 35, they drink essentially in the same levels in terms of the share of the population that regularly consumes alcohol, not necessarily in volumes, but the share of the population that drinks alcohol regularly by the time of 35 is indistinguishable now than it was from 25 years ago. And I think a lot of that has to do with what it means to be a kid these days in modern society, and the fact that a lot of kids have trackers on their phone, that parents know where they are all the time. And if you get caught or somebody posts a photo of you, you get kicked off the sports team or the track team or the chess club or the math club or the drama club. There are, the chances of you getting caught are much higher. Even if you try, one of the 20 parents in that friend group will have a tracker.
Exactly.
And if you try and leave your phone behind, somebody's going to text you and be like, hey, where are you? And nobody answers, and they're going to get to the bottom of it. Or like somebody posts one photo of you at a party and there's some like beer nearby and you get kicked off of your sports team. So that's why I was when I was a sophomore in high school, I was starting on the varsity baseball team despite being like 105 pounds because, somebody had taken a picture with a flip phone and posted it on MySpace, and 11 upperclassmen got kicked off of the baseball team.
Wow.
And so like there are real immediate consequences to drinking with a much like a higher likelihood of getting caught, which says to me that like those are the things that young people respond to, real immediate consequences. And so I think that, it makes sense that these young people
it really does.
drinking less, and those limitations, the drivers of those limitations are disappearing as they get older, right? Because you no longer have a tracker on your phone when you're in your mid 30s. And so you don't face those pressure. However, I think there is a real societal shift in what, if you don't have alcohol be a part of your formative years, right? The things that establish what acceptable behaviors are and what socialization looks like and what is normal behavior, alcohol's not part of that anymore. So I think there is a weakening of that decoupling of the trends between underage drinking and people drinking when they get adulthood. So I think a lot of people in the industry saw the findings as positive, whereas I saw them more as like, I don't think this is a sustainable change. Like so far, it seems to be kind of the best case scenario where the industry can celebrate the decline in underage drinking and, really cut back on the kind of moments where some of the most, people that are young, they binge drink when they drink, right? Whereas if you get older, you drink more times a week, but you drink far fewer drinks. And so, young people are way more likely to binge drink. They're way more likely to be dumb on account of being young and their brains aren't being fully formed. And so the industry can celebrate that, right? Say, hey, these people are going to spend the same amount of alcohol when they're in their 30s, and we get to skip the worst versions of their consumption in their early years. So they're going to be more responsible when they do drink, and this is a win. I think that's true, but I also think that the center cannot hold. Things must fall apart.
So you're saying that with the upcoming generations, that's a trend that will continue.
I just see
and
fewer.
It's going to end up declining the industry.
I tend to fall on that front. That there are ways that life and socialization are changing, and the role of alcohol in that kind of says to me that this trend that's held, that underage drinking has been falling for 30 years, and yet by the time people are 35, they drink at the same levels, or at least the same like share of the population consumes alcohol as previous generations. I tend to think that doesn't seem as sustainable.
Well, it probably isn't.
I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
No, I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I think what you're saying, it really makes a lot of sense. Kids don't have much money, we didn't either, but I'm sure that plays a factor in it too. I mean, kids are also living with their parents longer. We were kicked out at 19. Like, go on, get on your way. Like, go figure it out. Go fly, butterfly. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, let's keep you home my parents wanted to keep me home for as long as they could, but like, back in that time.
And if people staying home with their parents is an indicator of the fact that there isn't as much economic opportunity out there, like is kind of a symptom rather than a cause of being poor, right? Like living with your parents isn't the reason you're poor. You're poor and therefore you live with your parents.
Right.
But another part of it is, when we look at these declines in drinking and young people in particular, almost all of them are driven by boys and young men. I use boys and men interchangeably, but women are more or less drinking at the same rates as they have historically. And if we're talking about a 25-year horizon, women are actually drinking more than they have historically. So all of these declines are driven by boys, which has resulted in this very interesting kind of change that kind of in the last 5 years, where women are now the majority of alcohol consumers in their early 20s. And I think if I was able to get the data to do this analysis, they would actually be the majority of alcohol consumers in their 20s.
Interesting.
Boys still drink twice as much as women do, but women are going to college more than boys. Like 60% of recent college graduates are women. And that means that women are making more money than they used to. It means that they're kind of going through the kind of secularization process that college does that might decouple some of your moral apprehensions about using alcohol. It means that women are navigating the workspace in high-powered jobs, which means that you need to network and go out and drink and connect with people. There are all these different factors. You make more money with a college degree. And so, women are just becoming a bigger part of the drinking population. And it just means that, like, for every boy who stops drinking and every, woman who stops drinking, since men drink twice as much, it's kind of like the methane versus CO2. Methane's a much more potent, a greenhouse gas. So, like, every boy that stops drinking, you're losing twice as much volume as for every woman that stops drinking, just because
Yeah, that's a
boys
good
drink so
point.
much more.
Well, it's also, you know, become a convenience factor as we've seen with RTDs. They're lower cost, they're, single serve, you
Yeah.
know. I
I mean,
also wonder
we've
if
had all
that
these single
has
serve. Yeah, we've always had these like single serve things for boys, right? It was called beer, and
yeah.
I think it's important to understand that, like, that category has been antagonistic towards a lot of women in the past. That their advertising was pretty misogynistic. Women more often than not in those ads were, either props or, like literally there was an ad, the Coors ad where it was, about some sexual fantasy with twins, right? Like that was the beer ad, was I like twins. And I just think about, whether or not you're a woman watching that and being like, yeah, this is for me. This is a category that's definitely speaking my language because that's what
Right.
I'm into. And so it's this weird thing where, the alcohol categories become much more kind to women, I think, in a lot of ways, and more thoughtful for them. And a category like hard seltzer has really opened up an occasion. There was no beverage for women that wasn't super sweet unless they wanted to drink beer that was sessionable and easy and ready to drink. And so there was this really big opportunity seen with hard seltzers serving women, but it turned out like boys are also really into it because they also kind of think beer tastes like poison, is really bitter and icky. And, they also are as likely as women to be on a diet. And so the industry is kind of realizing like, hey, if I actually market to these underserved consumer groups, maybe, just maybe, it's going to delight and surprise the consumer group that I was already going after. Or at least that the message I try to deliver to them is that, hey, hard seltzers, you thought they were for women. You put a bunch of mermaids in your Super Bowl ad. In the case of Bon and Viv, it turns out frat boys like it too. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities to continue to use that, say, with marketing to Latinos, right? So Latinos are 20% of the U.S. population. Why do people like Modelo? Why do people like tequila? Well, 20% of the U.S. population is Latino, and 80% of those guys are from Mexico or of Mexican heritage. And these people aren't just consuming and creating this like monolith. They're out there changing society. And if we think about like someone like Bad Bunny, he's Puerto Rican. He sings exclusively in Spanish, and he's the second most downloaded artist in the world according to Spotify. And like, if you're out there trying to like connect with Latinos and you focus on Bad Bunny, guess what? Everyone likes Bad Bunny because he's badass. And so, you're going to use this to maybe speak to your core audience in a way that you were never able to, with say, some of these other talent and creative ideas. Another example is like how many like wine bottles, right? You try and buy a wine and it has food pairings and it's like duck and goose and lamb and, like seafood. And it's like, do you know what I eat? Wine people? Like, how many times have I actually had lamb at home besides like Mediterranean lamb shanks, in the form of like making something from some Middle Eastern dish that is, not even, you wouldn't drink wine with it necessarily, but it's just to say like, okay, well, that doesn't actually connect with anybody. Nobody eats lamb with like the way that they're thinking, like the French, you know, lamb. So why don't you just put tacos, like pairs with tacos? Like that is,
Make it
and
simple.
make it simple. But also, so you're saying like, hey, I see you, Latino consumer, but guess what? Everyone eats tacos. And so you can do a better job. So a lot of the takeaway from this report is like, the demographics are changing, that when we talk about young people, we're probably more likely than not talking about a person of color or a woman. And, they are just a much larger share of that population. They're a much larger share of the demographic groups that are drinking more relative to what they did 25 years ago. If you're in the business of marketing to women and people of color, you are actively marketing to a growing demographic. Whereas if you're in the business of marketing to white men, you have to beat everyone else out to get sales because they are a shrinking demographic, not only in terms of numbers, but in terms of their like drinking habits. And so it's kind of this idea of saying, hey, go out there and like market to these people, and it might just help you rejuvenate and reconnect with other people, right? Because, back to the beer analogy of if you don't belittle or sexualize women unnecessarily in your advertising, that turns me off, right? Like, I'm a boy. I don't like that. That isn't my, like, I don't think that's cool. I don't think it's fun. It's not a value that I hold. And so, you may think like, oh, women are the only ones who don't like this like nasty bit of, advertising. It's like, no, boys don't like it too. And they also, especially if they're hetero and they want to, show off to, seem cool, like you're not going to show up at a party, espousing these old ideas and these old,
Right.
ways of communicating with women. You want to be a, attractive person, and the values that, are more likely to be seen as attractive aren't the ones that belittle and sexualize. And so that's the other thing, is like, it's not just women, it's boys also that are going to be less likely to respond to those messages today.
Yeah, that's true. That's really interesting. Can we shift over to, did you go to Dusseldorf for the wine and spirit
Pro
show?
wine?
Pro
Yeah,
wine?
sure, I did. Yeah.
And I saw on LinkedIn you did a talk about wine trends and how they dropped in the 80s and like what they did to kind of build back that business. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So the it's not just wine, it's actually kind of all beverage alcohol.
Oh, it was?
Like, that
Okay.
presentation is about wine, but I think the trends I'm talking about are universal
Okay.
to beverage alcohol, and we're talking about the US here. Uh, you know, in the 1980s, between like 1970 and 1995, spirit sales on a per capita basis in the United States declined by 50%. Between 1986 and 1993, wine sales fell by 30%. And, we're looking at the current period, and we've seen wine sales lose 15% of volumes. Spirits are declining. I think I was talking to a retailer who had said like whiskey volumes are down versus 2019. In terms of sales volumes, not necessarily dollar sales, because we are seeing kind of premiumization there. So, the question is, well, how bad could it get, right? We saw a 50% decline over a 20-year period for spirits and a 30% decline over 7 years, and we're only 2 or 3 years into the current downturn. Like, could it be that bad? And I would say, yeah, it could. We could lose that much. We could hemorrhage that much volume. It's happened before. So it's kind of saying there is precedent for it to get much worse. But also, is there anything that was happening in the 80s that can tell us about what's happening today? And there aren't as many clear conclusions from that. There were some equivalents, like the 80s were a period of high inflation, and though like economic downturns haven't affected sales of alcohol. Think the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, we didn't see big declines in alcohol sales, and yet we're not even in a recession and we're seeing declines in alcohol sales now. And like, so maybe recession, like inflation does something that like unemployment doesn't do to alcohol sales. I'm not sure, but there was this big bubble of the population of the United States born in the 80s, right, were reaching their prime spending years over, in the 70s. And yet when, the people born in the 30s was just a minuscule generation because of the Great Depression, meant that in the 80s, there was just a kind of a very small population in their late 30s and 40s that would have, driven some of the more premium spending. We also saw in the 80s, and that's similar today with boomers and Gen Z, but we're also seeing in the 80s, that's kind of where the similarities, not where the similarities stop, but there was a lot of narratives in the 80s about health. And I think, people being concerned about health and the end of like the 3 martini lunch and things like that. I think a lot of that was driven by the decline in drunk driving, because in the 80s, we actually saw enforcement begin, that there was actually standards for drunk driving and real penalties. The Mothers Against Drunk Driving was formed in like 1980. And there were also the legal drinking age was increased from 18 to 21 on a state by state basis over the 15 years between the 1976 and 1991 or something like that. So you were seeing like literally a structural change of like chopping off a segment of the population that was allowed to drink. So there's a lot of change that was happening there, but it's hard to connect that to some of the change that's happening now with the public health declarations of alcohol and whether or not it's good for you or bad for you. Like, they're not as real, right? There's no like, we're not raising the drinking age to 25 or creating new drunk driving laws like like in Vietnam in 2000 they implemented a really severe penalty for drunk driving that led to like a 25% decline in alcohol consumption overnight. And it was just like, those real policies change behavior and change consumption. And so it's really hard to be an industry analyst and look at the current downturn, which is as bad as it can be. It's probably worse than it's ever been in my lifetime, having been born in 1990. And so I kind of am embarrassed as an analyst saying, I don't know what the most important thing is driving this decline, but I don't know it can be significantly worse, and we should plan for the worst, because our goal over the next couple of years is not growth, it's survival. And I think companies should be very deliberate and very cautious in building their strategy and really be careful about building capacity and inventory. I don't think that there's like a fast consumer recovery around the corner. And I think, if I were a brand, I would build a plan around not seeing growth again until for 2 or 3 years.
For like some of the more established brands, you're referring
Yeah,
referring
if
to,
you're a
or
new
just
brand
in
and you're
general?
opening up new accounts, yes.
Yeah.
But I guess like you have to, if you want to grow and the base level is 5%, declines year on year, then you need to get 10%, you need to outperform your competitors by 15%. Right. And the real problem is when you start building out production capacity and things like that, there's a real risk that you end up committing to a supply that, like, if you plan for 10% growth and you decline by 10% that year, there isn't a 10% gap in the inventory versus your actual demand. There's a 20% gap because you built for growth and you lost volumes. And so that's where you end up seeing companies go bankrupt. And I would just advise companies to avoid bankruptcy and be cautious and be really, really disciplined about supply and not necessarily investment in branding, but investing in capacity and infrastructure. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to use other companies' capacity to grow, and even allowing for more out of stocks than there used to be. Because I think that what you really don't want is to have excess inventory, whereas out of stocks are just, something that running tight budgets is going to have to allow for.
Yep. Yeah, no, 100%. We've talked on this show, about what is it going to take to win? You got to have a story. You got to have an elevated experience. It's not just a wine anymore. You got to have, and we all know what it's like to build out a wine brand. It's a hand sell anyway, right? It is storytelling. It is the vineyards. It is, And I think that with, people being in isolation, they want to connect more. They want to hear the story. They want to hear the struggle. They want to hear, everything is peachy all the time. And, then people get behind people, and when they win, we all get excited that they're sharing those experiences and that they're getting their wins. And so it's
Yeah,
interesting.
you mentioned Pro Wine, and when I went to Pro Wine, there is a demand problem in the industry. And yet, as I walked around that, albeit this is a trade-focused event, no one talked about how they're talking to consumers. No one talked about their marketing plan. They just talked about the terroir and how long it's aged and what is the grape and like blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, no one here is thinking about how they connect and, you know, build demand for the next generation of consumers. And it was just like literally no one wanted to talk about like, what is our campaign? What are we about? Like, how are we going to like connect with a new audience and grow the pie? It was all such consistent in the weeds, all about the wine, all about the product. And, I think that is the kind of thing that is going to those brands that can't stand out, right? If you look like everyone else, you can't outgrow the market. And so if you can't figure out to do something better and innovate and look different and do something different, the best you could hope for is 5% declines in a scenario where the industry is shrinking by 5%.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, gosh, that was 11 years ago when I went.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a minute. I'm sure it's evolved and changed.
I bet it has not, just like the rest of the wine industry. I bet it is almost identical to what it used to be in terms of what people are talking about.
Yeah. I don't remember anyone ever talking about any branding, though, to your point. Yeah.
Yep.
It's all about, the slopes and the morning sun or the afternoon sun.
What kind
Yeah.
of soil it is, which as
Yeah.
somebody who wanted to become a soil scientist at one point in their life, I appreciate. But like, I
Yeah.
don't think consumers are going to respond to a conversation about cation exchange capacity.
Nope. I don't think so. They get confused just looking at a wine bottle, right?
I get confused just looking at a wine bottle. So
Yeah.
it is harder than rocket science in some ways.
It's just a crapshoot. You just got to
Yep.
try it. Yeah. So is there anything else that you're kind of working on that you want to talk about before we shift over?
No, that's the big ones. My most recent writing.
Yeah.
Again, just, I really am just trying to figure out like why are these things happening and who are they happening to? And, when it comes to these trends, just encourage people to stay curious, and getting into the weeds is a good thing to do. Never like, a good example is if somebody says they care about health in a survey, does that mean they're healthy or that they have a health problem? And I think that a lot of people just assume, oh, it means they're healthy, that they're doing exercise and they're going out and, eating healthy and doing all these things right. I tend to think it's, just as likely to mean that, somebody who cares about health has a health problem. And that, when we see young people saying they care about health, and you look at the statistics, like obesity rates have tripled among people aged 15 to 25 over the last, 30 years. So when young people say they care about health, it might actually mean they have a health problem.
Yeah.
And so that is really important to understand, because it, like it it doesn't mean they're doing things that are healthy. So it's this weird disconnect, I think. So again, remaining curious and asking, what does that mean? Why is that happening? And who is it happening to? Is a much more useful question as a follow-up than anything else. So just always dig one layer deeper and see what you find.
Yeah. Well, I certainly like the way you think because it is different, because it's more academic, which we don't have enough of in our industry.
I'd agree.
And so you definitely really stand out because of your methodologies and how you, come to these conclusions. And obviously people are wanting to learn and want the information, right? I mean, we're a curious people because we're all trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
To some degree based on, whatever research, is out there. And so I applaud you thank you for doing it, for doing the work, for digging in.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's a ton of fun, and I really enjoy hearing feedback from the industry on these things. And any of your listeners want to reach out to me, they can, and tell me whether I'm wrong. That's the best thing I can hear. I love being told I'm wrong because it makes me think about these questions differently. One example would be uh, somebody I really respect looked at my report, and I made this assumption that we talked about, which is that if alcohol isn't a part of young people's lives, it's going to be less important later on, right? Just like if you never read fantasy as a teenager, you're probably not going to be that into fantasy books when you're, in your 30s. It's not certain, it's just less likely. And they said, I don't buy that necessarily. And it triggered me to think about that problem through, like, okay, if I was wrong, what would it look like? And then just thinking through, okay, what is an experience that would cause somebody who started drinking younger to be less likely to drink later in life? And it's like, well, if underage drinking is bad for you and hurts your development, like, and opportunities, maybe you're less likely to go to college and less likely to graduate from college and less likely to be successful in life. And therefore, by the time you're 30, 35, you have more money and you have, a better job, and you can spend more on alcohol and you have more stability in your life. Or maybe your first experience alcohol sucks, like, what about vomiting into your parents' cabins, like your best friend's parents' summer home when it's empty,
Yep.
throwing up into the toilet makes you want to do more of that? None of it. So there is a question of, like, there is, I could be wrong, and I want people to tell me I'm wrong so I can think of ways in which, I can ask new questions and discover new topics.
Yeah, I think that's good. Because sometimes if you come at it with a different angle, if you change maybe a methodology or, a part of that, you learn, you peel back the onion or you learn something else about that topic, which I think is really interesting. It just seems like this new generation of non-drinkers is very, very, very interesting. And
Everyone is interesting, right?
yeah,
It's this thing where it's like everything in the world is interesting. You just need to find a question to ask. And
yeah,
to some extent, I think, and again, I'm being very preachy and kind of, let's talk about thinking. But to some extent, one of my favorite things somebody said came from Nate Silver, who's kind of vilified by both the left and the right. He's a scientist, data scientist, journalist guy who's famous for making political predictions. And, he got in a lot of trouble in 2016 because he said it was a 70% chance of Hillary Clinton winning and Donald Trump won. But the New York Times had like a 2% chance, and so it's like, really, like, he was a lot closer to being right and was much more comfortable with uncertainty. And, like, why are you better at predicting things than other people? And his answer wouldn't be, well, I'm better at math, or I'm better at, statistical models. His thing would be that if you're out there trying to, build a concept of the world and build a model for what's going to happen, you should spend 95% of your time asking questions and 5% of the time building models to answer those questions. And I think his perception was that most people, at least with the skill sets to build the models, do the inverse, where they spend 95% of the time talking about the methodology and the careful way that they constructed these models, and 5% of the time actually asking the relevant questions. Um, Even if you're not good at, econometrics and computer programming, spend more time asking questions, and I think you'll be better off asking the right question than building the wrong model for the wrong question.
yeah, that's stuff really interesting. Yeah, because surveys are really important, and you know, I think
And
they're
also,
also
yeah,
hard.
and flawed.
Yeah, I mean, when you see some of the, papers or, articles that are written and it's such a small sample, it's like, well, how is that predictive? You know?
Well, there's also a big gap in what an academic person would say between stated and revealed preference. Stated preference being what you say you'll do, and revealed preference being what you actually do. Right. And, everyone's
Fair.
saying, I want to cut back on how much makeup I buy in the year ahead. And then you buying just as much makeup as you did this year, or saying, I want to drink less alcohol, and you doing exactly the same amount of alcohol drinking as you did that year. Right. So people, saying things is easy, doing things is hard. And so there's usually a really big gap between those two. And so the job of somebody doing a survey is to figure out how to get people to answer questions honestly
Yeah.
in ways they actually know the answer, right? Because if you ask somebody, for example, in a survey, how much did you drink in the last month? Nobody knows. If somebody asked, what did you drink? Did you have any alcohol today? What did you drink? You can answer that question, right? And so figuring out like how to build those surveys. Don't say like, asking very, very direct questions that are asking for little tidbits of information, that people can answer is really important. But also just like, how do you ask that question, right? Do you say, I'm building an internal survey for our team and for our management. And one of the proposed questions is like, we do a good job. Our bank does a great job of hiring diverse candidates, right? That's the original question. And then, the alternative wording would be company doesn't hire enough women, right? And how you frame that will dramatically change what their answers are, even if the question is like what the information you're trying to get is exactly the same. And so building instruments that actually elicit not just accurate responses, but neutralize the bias inherent in the way you're asking it is just really hard. And it's just not that kind of work. Requires way more money than most surveys are willing to do. And journalists and the industry don't have the time or the knowledge to really filter that information through that lens.
Yeah. No, 100%. It's time, it's building community. You gotta have those emails or whatever it is. And that's why there's very few companies, I think, that have that reputation of, okay, this is something that we can follow. So how would you like for people to reach out to you?
All right. So we have a podcast called Liquid Assets. You can find it on wherever you get podcasts. You're listening to a podcast or watching a podcast, so you know how to find them. But Liquid Assets, we mostly talk about the kind of stuff I'm talking about now. It's a few of fellow analysts with the same job I have, but also we've invited somebody from Campari to talk about how do you build brands in the on-premise. We have economists come on to contextualize, what is happening with the Trump administration and what to expect going forward. We had an episode recently with some former people in charge of negotiating distribution contracts to talk about what is actually inside distribution contracts and what is an optimal approach to distribution contracts look like. How can you negotiate them and things like that. So I think there's a nice mix of very, very practical advice that is immediately actionable and high level kind of thought pieces that might frame how you approach problems that you can do yourself. So the podcast is a great starting point. And then, you'll see my name in the episode description. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll get back to you that way. I don't have any social media anymore. I used to have a blue check on Twitter, but social media is bad for you, or at least it's bad for me. And so I've just said, hey, I will just send somebody a text message when I need validation of my feelings instead of posting them on the internet.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's just, we post family stuff and pictures of babies and puppies and, I follow babies and puppies and that's about it.
Yeah, the thing of quitting social media is now it's the burden of my wife to share all the pictures of our baby and, make sure everyone knows that we're still alive. I would otherwise basically be a non-entity to everyone in my former life. So yeah, it's harder to keep up with people if you're not just able to post a video and be like, I'm alive.
Yeah, it is harder.
Yeah.
But to your point, they're just a phone call away.
Yeah, I always feel like a weirdo. And I'm like, just call me. I don't want to text you. Just be like, hey, do you want to go out and, meet up? Especially with other parents who are playing like a play date. I'll just call people and be like, do you want to do it or not? Because I don't want to sit in limbo for an hour, not knowing what I'm going to do that evening. So I am pro phone call, but also I'm a weirdo. And I try to understand that me being weird is not by any means, like, I don't understand Gen Z. I don't understand what it means to be, obsessed with becoming a creator or, social media star. I don't have the same heroes. And so I think, helpful to just ask people who
Yeah.
do have that experience. And, if you're a company, hire people in their 20s to do your social media for you.
Yeah.
Put guardrails around them, but just don't do it yourself. So that's really, that kind of thing. But yeah, no social media for me. So you'll have to find me on LinkedIn, which is the closest thing I do to social media, which is a reluctant one. And then, things are weird on LinkedIn, but there's
They
also,
keep changing things, and I don't care for the logarithm right now.
I just get a lot of political content, and then like a really dumb video of a baby like trying to feed itself like mashed potatoes and failing and being like, here's what a Fortune 500 CEO can learn from this 1-year-old. And it's just like, you're just sharing a baby video. Like, stop trying to like, that's a cute baby. It has nothing to do with your leadership capabilities. But those posts get like 10 million likes and people being like, so true, so true. So it's pretty cringe, to be honest. But it's
I'm with you.
it is nice when you see people actually posting stuff that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's good.
No, I agree. But the frustrating part is, why can't I see more of that?
I don't know. I keep telling it to stop showing me those weird things, and they keep doing it. So
yes, it's so frustrating.
It is very frustrating that they're it is. I don't think anyone's looking at LinkedIn and being like, this is better than it used to be. But they, like every other company, are showing that what they do is they are in the business of attention. They want to keep your attention, and they want to keep it as long as they can so they can serve you more ads and more content. The reason it's free is because they monetize your attention, and so they're trying to keep it. And it turns out people watch baby videos more like enthusiastically and more consistently than Burkhard being like, well, technically, if we look at Gen Zs and their demographic like characteristics, it's just, show me a picture of a baby, please.
Yeah, babies are always going to win.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, are there any mentors or resources that kind of helped you, or that are go-to for you?
Resources, I mean, it's just so hard, there's just not that much information out there in the public sphere. There's no like books to read necessarily on how to grow. When it comes to reading, I would just say, have fun, read stuff that you like, not stuff about the industry, because if you spend too much time only reading industry sources, you accept the bullshit that other people,
Yeah.
I shouldn't swear, but like, you just don't
You're
want to, drink the Kool-Aid. So always trying to keep an arm's length and finding ways to borrow from other segments, but also just not only ever thinking about your business, because then you forget that like there are other things going on in people's lives. In terms of a mentor, I used to get choked up every time I talked about my boss, Steve Rannicleve, because, I'm a very unusual candidate to work for a bank. I have ADHD. I have trouble focusing at work. I can go months without publishing something because I'm trying really hard to do so, but can't find the inspiration or can't, get myself to put pen to paper. And 3 months of the year, I'm the best at my job. And 9 months out of the year, I'm not that good at it. And finding people that accept that and find ways to work with it and still know that I can be a valuable member of this team and of this community is something I'm really deeply thankful for, and also recognize is something that, like is a privilege, right? Is something that I can show up, look the way I look, and I, have a degree from a Ivy League school, and people just assume like, well, this guy's got to be credible. Like he's got to be smart. He's got to be like, he deserves to be here. And then I promptly demonstrate that I'm not, and I shouldn't. And so I do get all these opportunities that are element of just, that's what privilege means to me, is that I've just been very lucky for people to give me all those chances.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take that for granted, but more than anything, just continue to see that, somebody with my profile continues to get opportunities, even though they aren't as consistent. They're not as focused. They're not as determined and professional, right? I'm pretty unprofessional in a lot of ways, but I just appreciate the opportunity to keep being myself in those spaces. And a big part of that is my boss, Steve, and my other boss, Roland Fumasi, who just continues to be a pugnacious fighter that turns all his energy towards protecting his flock and the people who work for him, rather than the other way around of using that energy to punish those who aren't doing what he wants. I've been very lucky to find a very accepting home, because I think, toxic workplaces are traumatizing to people, and they're the kind of things that give you nightmares and recurring dreams. And I just, am so glad that I've been able to find repeatedly workplaces that accept me for who I am. They know what I'm good at and don't punish me too hard for the things I'm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you know, it's always really a great feeling to know when you're home, and it kind of becomes a family, and that's really important. That's really cool. That's really awesome, actually.
Pretty lucky.
We saw.
So don't let toxic people run your company. Stop letting
Yes.
toxic people have leadership jobs. That's the only thing I would say. It may not be illegal. It may not be like discrimination, but toxicity is something that should not be acceptable. And I think we need to do a lot more as an industry to have a bit of a movement and a bit of a push to make sure those people aren't ruining people's lives.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Yeah, we've all experienced that from one time or another. It's not fun.
Nope.
Not fun at all. What pain points are you seeing in the industry that, just overall is kind of affecting?
Rather than talk about pain points, because everyone who works for a beverage alcohol company knows how hard it is out there.
Yeah.
Me, I'm not independent from it, but like, I'm not missing sales targets every day like you guys are. Like, I'm not scared that bankruptcy is an option for me working in a bank. It's like not something I have to deal with. So rather than talk about like that stuff, which I recognize I just can't directly relate to, it's not something that I experience in my daily job. I would just say, like, what is your big opportunity here? Like, what is a shortcut to growth that is like cost effective at this time? And I would kind of just say, like, hire people in their 20s that look like the consumers that you're not good at targeting. Give them some power, give them the keys, and put some guardrails around them so they don't do anything illegal. But generally, at least in the wine business, I haven't seen anyone try that strategy. I haven't seen anyone go out there and actively try to, like, I'm half Venezuelan. I have presented to hundreds of people in the wine business. I've met one person that's Latina in the wine business that's like a meaningful part of a corporate marketing apparatus, right? So as it, like, go hire young people that look like your audience and give them some power, even if just to be, one of the most useful things I've ever experienced in my job is having a 22-year-old assistant to my boss at the time and being like, talk to me about this thing. I don't understand it. And they would just like talk to me about their experiences. And it was super informative, because surveys aren't going to do that job.
Right.
Like, you should be doing focus groups all the time. And the easiest way to do it is just surround yourself with people who you can just ask,
True.
And that's like a really cool way to think about that, is like, I don't have to ask what 20-year-olds or 22-year-olds are up to. I just have one next to me. I don't have to ask about how like Latinos celebrate Christmas differently than white Christian people, because I can just ask. I don't have to wonder. I can just ask the 22-year-old who grew up opening presents at midnight from the Niño Jesus instead of Santa Claus, right? And those kind of things like are really great inspirations for creative and ideas, but also for just understanding the consumer.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot. What about your outlook in the next year?
Bad.
Bad.
Not
okay. Good. We kind of talked about that.
Yeah.
So
It's not gonna get better. So plan for the worst and survive as best you can.
yeah, it's survival of the fittest out there at this point.
Yeah. Or the most interesting. I'm not sure what the right analogy is, but yeah, go out there, make sure you're in business in 5 years, and let's go from there.
So are you ready to play a game?
Yeah. I love games.
Okay, this is rapid fire game, and I'm going to ask 3 questions, and you just pick whatever comes to your brain. Don't overthink it.
I have ADHD. Overthinking is like literally the thing I don't do. So let's go.
Okay.
Let's do this.
I'm borderline too, so I sympathize. I leave the cupboards open in the kitchen, and I lose my phone about 4 times a day.
Do you ever have the experience of going to grab something, forgetting why you went there, coming back with not that thing?
Yes.
Going back, and then
Sorry, puppies.
There have been times where I've gone to get something from the kitchen 3 times before I remembered finally got the thing I initially went to get.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel your pain. I mean,
It's cool.
I'm not
Yeah.
diagnosed or on medication or anything, but I do that. Focusing is hard. I have all these businesses and
Look,
whatnot.
it's a real thing, figuring out like what you're capable of versus what you are consistently doing or really hard. And for anybody in any sphere of life to try and figure out, matching their disposition to their aspirations and adjusting appropriately from there, and being nice to yourself, knowing that you're not going to be as productive as that, your colleague, but maybe you're going to be as more creative, or maybe, more, fun, maybe. I don't know what it is, but trying to valorize what you can do, but also limiting yourself to what, being nice to yourself, knowing that you can't do everything the way other people do. At least
Fair.
that's what I would tell myself, even though I usually fail to be nice to myself about those things.
Well, you need to give yourself some grace.
Yeah,
at least from time to time.
Yeah.
We're not perfect. We're human, so that makes us imperfect.
So hit me with these 3 rapid fire questions.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. If you were a beverage, what would you be?
I would be that that cold water you drink straight from the faucet when it's 2 a.m. and you don't have a cup and you're super thirsty. That would be what I would be. I'd be a 2 a.m. furtive little like sip of, a cheeky little sip of water straight from the faucet in the bathroom. That is like literally the best thing you ever drank. That's what I'd want to be.
That's cool. That's funny. That is not predictable, but very fun. I like it. What's your favorite place to travel?
Favorite place to travel? I would say, I love going to visit my wife's family in Barcelona. So they're Venezuelan and refugees and live in, 3 generations living in one house, but they're my wife, our daughter, her sister, her daughter, her other sister, her daughter, and her grandmother. And it is a ton of fun, but also I am the only boy in that environment. And so it's also it's very hard to be said boy and be scrutinized as such, being like, why is he doing this thing? And it's like, I'm just a boy, I'm sorry. But that's it. Yeah.
I'm a boy, that's what I do, man.
Yeah. Sorry I like snack more, or, didn't wipe down I didn't empty the dish drainer the way I should have, things like that. I did the dishes, which I understand is like a low bar, but still.
You're trying.
I am trying. I work hard.
And what's your favorite food?
My favorite food. I mean, American barbecue is just legitimately one of the best things in the universe.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Americans did jazz well, and barbecue. Those are really the things that we do better than anybody else. But good, like pistachio gelatos up there.
Me too.
And Japanese fried chicken. It's pretty dope. Karaage.
Yeah, it is.
And that's it. Yeah, those ones. My I'll leave it there.
Okay.
That's the best food.
Yeah, you picked some good ones. I'm with you.
What's yours?
Definitely.
What's your favorite?
Well, probably pizza. I just love pizza. I don't know why I love pizza.
What is the best kind of pizza then? The interesting version will be, what is the best version of pizza?
Okay.
And like, get in the comments if, disagree that deep dish Chicago style pizza is not the best.
Well, you can only eat one piece of those. In my hometown, we had the best pizza when I could eat gluten.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I don't eat gluten, like, I'm limited on where I can go. But there's a spot, Momo's in Dallas, that's like just a few miles from my house, and then they have this pesto sauce that they drizzle on it, and it's pepper. I'm a pepperoni girl.
Okay.
I love pepperoni, cheese, onions, mushrooms. Those are my go-tos.
Momo's
in Dallas, yeah.
Okay, let's see if this looks any good. Okay, it looks like it looks like generic pizza. Like, it's not it's not trying to be anything. It's just good. It's like
I don't.
pizza,
Yeah,
baseline pizza.
it's
It's not
baseline
like
pizza, probably.
if you ask Momo's like, what kind of pizza is it? They're like, what do you mean? We make pizza. They're like Neapolitana,
Yeah, it's not that. It's not that. But the gluten-free version that they have is really good. And so since I'm limited on where I can, I'd love to have a real Neapolitan pizza. Cheese curds are also high on my list.
You'd really like something we eat up around here, which would be might actually be gluten free, as a poutine. So,
Oh, yeah.
Have you had poutine? It's very good.
Yeah, I've had poutine.
Yeah.
It just depends on the gravy. Sometimes they'll put wheat in it to thicken it.
Yeah, just use starch. Different starch. You can do that.
Yeah.
The great Venezuelans have arepas, which are
I love arepas.
So they're always. I love meeting people who are gluten free and introducing them to arepas because they're a vessel. They're like they are. You put anything you want into them, and so if you're gluten free and lactose intolerant, you can just not put cheese in it. But they can be vegetarian. You can use black beans if you want.
Yes.
If you want something more kind of protein rich, strongly recommend all you gluten free people out there. Venezuelan arepas better than Colombian arepas, if you ask me.
I haven't had.
Go get arepas.
I don't know that I've only had Cuban arepas that I know of. There was a place in Dallas, but it's gone now because of the downturn. No, because of the hurricane. We had a hurricane rip through our neighborhood. So I think she was just American. I don't think she had any South American heritage. But we have a place called Cubans on the Run here. It is so good, and they put mozzarella cheese in between two pieces, and so good. I love arepas.
Sounds awesome. Yeah. Well, I hope you go and get some soon.
Yeah, I might call my wife to just have her pick it up on the way home. It sounds good. Anyway, well, I will let you get back to it, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing, your analysis of our industry from a more academic standpoint. I know maybe wasn't exactly what you had set out to do, but the industry thanks you for what you're doing.
No, I appreciate it. It was fun to not talk about business for a little bit, So I appreciate the thing you're doing here. So it was a great conversation for me anyways. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Me too. Well, I'll let you go, and we'll be in touch. Maybe do you ever go to industry events?
Yeah, some of them, but not all of them. I'll be at Bourcard Brooklyn. That's the next one I have on my calendar. But other than that, I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about going to that one, but I don't think I'm going to make it this year. Yeah. Next year.
For sure.
I'll get out of the...
It's one of the cheaper ones, It's only $200 or something. So
yeah,
very much like that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, I'll wave and I'll let you go. Get back to it. Okay. Bye-bye.
Produced by Fedora J Productions. Tune in next Thursday and have a great week.